everyone, morning. Welcome to our digital construction breakfast event. I hope you enjoy listening to our thought leaders from the comfort of your own homes. I'm Rosie, I'm a co-chair for the Surrey Club alongside Will Burkett and new business manager for Wilmot Dixon. I founded the club in 2018 and we've gone from strength to strength from then. For any new attendees, welcome. Constructing Excellence is a platform from which to stimulate debate and drive much needed change in the construction sector. Our thought leading members are from the entire supply chain, clients, industry and users, and we share a vision for change through innovation and collaboration. We're always looking to drive engagement with our audience, so if you'd like to get involved by becoming a member, you can sign up on our website, or if you're looking for a speaking opportunity or to discuss new regeneration schemes, then please get in touch with one of our committee. So we're going to start the session today with a poll. So here we go. Interesting. So what we ideally like to see in these forums is a real split across. And actually, I know because I've cheated and I've seen who's here today. I know we do have a better split than this. So perhaps some people are still busy munching on their granolas. But please do engage with the polls because it helps drive engagement and give us a feel for who's here today. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Now I'm going to pass over to committee member Rosemary Jarrett.
Thanks, Rosie. So welcome to our event on digital construction. Construction is one of the world's least digitised sectors, and most companies are yet to reap the full benefits of digital platforms. So today we want to focus on digital construction, and we're going to hear from two great speakers from Ridge and WSP about how they've used digital technology to achieve some excellence in their project delivery, and also how they're collaborating with others to try and help transform our construction industry. My name's Rosemary Jarrett and I'm a chartered civil engineer, and I currently lead a large science facilities programme for DEFRA. In my spare time, I'm the outgoing chair for the co-chair for the Constructing Excellence Club, and I've worked with Will and Rosie over the last couple of years to start up this club in Surrey. And I've been involved with the Constructing Excellence Awards as well. And I was really keen to put this digital construction event together because I'm passionate about bringing digital construction to life, but really to do that by sharing best practice and how people are delivering this on the ground. We've got to demystify this by showing people what are the practical applications and really identifying what are the benefits to all parts of the supply chain throughout the whole of the asset life cycle. So today we're going to hear from our two speakers, and I'll chair a question and answer session at the end. If you do like to ask a question either throughout or just at the end, if you, depending on what type of device you're on, there's a Q&A button. So I'm on an iPad, I just touch the screen and I can then see a Q&A button at the top. And you're very welcome to type questions throughout the presentation. I've also got a couple of polls to ask you because I'd like to make the event interactive. So let's go into those polls as well, really to see how you feel about digital construction currently. Oh, okay, so that's interesting. So we've got, the majority, 50% of people feeling low to moderate confidence about digital construction, and then the other 50% high to very high. So that sounds like actually we've got quite a engaged audience here already. So we should get some good questions. And then we've got a second poll as well. just how important do you think digital construction is to the future success of our industry? I feel like I should have a countdown clock here. And let's have a look at the results of that. Oh, wow. So 65% of people think it's absolutely vital. Actually, 95% think high importance or vital. So yeah, this should be, you know, a very, very engaged audience. So if I move on to the next slide to introduce the speakers. So I met both of the speakers at the recent SECB Constructing Excellence Awards, where I was one of the judges on the digital construction category. So our first speaker we're going to hear from is Michael Boyd from WSP, and he's head of digital services. And he's a building information modelling specialist and chartered construction manager with over 20 years experience. And Michael leads WSP's digital services teams. So he's got a team of specialists who manage BIM consultancy commissions for clients and contractors. And he's also heavily involved in immersive and virtual reality. So he's got a real interest in how these processes and technologies can be used collaboratively to tackle the challenges facing our construction industry. And we're going to hear from him about his Hanover project, or his team project for Hanover, which was very complex mixed use development with many challenges. And then our second speaker, I'm delighted to welcome Brent Rees, who's from Ridge & Partners, and he's a partner for digital engineering. And with his architectural background, that's allowed him to utilise his technical knowledge of construction design and delivery to really work closely with clients and stakeholders. He actually founded the digital engineering group within Ridge, and that drives the delivery of their BIM and digital construction strategies. And Brent and his team were actually the winners of the Digital Construction Award, because we were very, very impressed with the absolutely innovative application in the use of digital construction tools and techniques to address a really big challenge to the construction industry, and that was fire compartmentation and ensuring it's compliant. So I think you'll really enjoy hearing from both of them with quite different types of applications of digital construction. So I will pass over to Michael now to start his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. Yep, thank you very much to Rosemary for inviting me to come here. But today I'm going to be presenting Hanover, which is a really complex project that I've been working on in different roles since 2014. So I've really been through the whole journey with this project. This is a mixed-use development in London of 220,000 square feet. We were initially commissioned by the client, which is Great Portland Estates, and then once we moved into construction, we were novated to the contractor Mace. So before I get into the actual case study of this project, I think it's important to set the scene and describe what digital construction is, because depending on where you are in the industry, you maybe have a different view, and you might have a different view than what I have, so it'd be good to find that maybe in the questions or in the chat. But when we think about digital construction, there's lots of acronyms and terms that are floating around the industry just now, like building information modeling, digital engineering, digital twin. But if we think about the actual term digital construction, this is a very good image that I pinched from one of the CDBB slides from a presentation recently. And digital applies to the whole built environment, not just the delivery piece. So when we're talking about digital construction, we're really just talking about the application of digital processes and technologies in the delivery side of things, so design, construction, and handover. Now, although it looks like a very small part of the puzzle, when we look at this image, it really does lay the foundation for some of the larger digital aspirations like the National Digital Twin. So if you do have time, I don't have time to go into it just now, but there's some great resources at the UK BIM framework and the Construction Innovation Hub and CDBB. Now, to pull that in a little bit more detail, When we're explaining to clients that the sort of services that we go into and we're offering, these are the main sort of groupings, the simplified groupings of some of the services that we offer. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but in this particular presentation I'm going to give you, I'm going to focus on design integration and validation, the 4D programming and logistics reporting, and some of the operational and performance data extraction. Okay, so I think we're ready for the next poll. So this poll is asking, who is currently benefiting the most from digital construction processes? So what's your opinion of who is currently benefiting? Okay, so that's interesting. So we've got 33% are saying it's the contractor, but overwhelmingly we're saying it's the architects are benefiting. Okay, that's interesting. So we've got another poll for you. So this one's asking who could potentially benefit the most from the digital construction. So we think contractors and architects are benefiting the most now. So who do we think could potentially benefit the most? Okay, so kind of expected, but an overwhelming response saying that the clients could potentially benefit the most. And that's maybe setting the scene for some questions as to why clients aren't currently benefiting the most from digital construction. So the reason I want to talk to you about Hanover is from all of the main service offerings around the digital construction, digital engineering space that we work in, this particular case study, we were able to apply 8 of the 9 groupings of services. So a bit of background about Hanover, it's a very large mixed-use development right in central London, the heart of London's Mayfair, next to New Bond Street. And it is actually, there's an oversight development above the New Bond Street station. So that was a live construction site on the same area. So that added a very high level of complexity to the project. So we've got some very high-end retail on the ground floor. We've got some residential works as well. But the large oversight development, which you can see just on the left of the development there, that is a large commercial office space. So when we met with our client, Great Portland Estates, in 2014, this was the dark ages of employers' information requirements. PAS 1192 had just come out, and they sat with us and said, we have 3 things that we want. We really need to de-risk this project, so we want a robust coordination process. But what we're really interested in is effective pre-construction planning and understanding how our development fits within the context of the Crossrail development below. Interestingly, from a developer's point of view, they were interested in pulling out asset data that they were able to use from procuring their facilities management teams and just being able to reuse that data throughout the life cycle of the project, which is quite forward thinking from a developer, especially at that point in time. So jumping into some of the technology we used, and I'm definitely not going to go into how we used all of this. This is the overall sort of technology stack that my team used on the project. So I'm sure some of you are very familiar with some of these tools, and we're going to dive into some of them, but that gives you an overview of some of the tools. It definitely wasn't we didn't just use Revit to coordinate this project or anything like that. It was a detailed process. So because of the complexity of this project and all the different parties involved, and we had a significant team involved in this project as well, we needed to find a way of coordinating that. And we found that a project management tool or a intelligent online database tool like Airtable was extremely good at allowing us to organize all the different tasks and the different coordination workflows we were working to. So it's easy to think that if you're doing clash detection, you're just clash detecting one model against another. But on this project, we had multiple federations of different parties, and understanding when a model is updated, what model that particular model fits within the various federations was important, and how we were managing those different clash tests and coordination. And we'll come on to that in just a second. So Airtable is a free tool. I think you can pay for it, but it was a fantastic tool to coordinate our sort of coordination process. And this will maybe give an idea of just how complex this project was. We had 55 different models in the federated model. And these are the construction packages. So obviously through design stages, we had maybe 4 or 5 different models from architecture, structural engineer, M&E, and some point cloud scans, and the Crossrail development below. But once we get into construction and we bring in the contractor's supply chain, the complexity of that goes through the roof, and we're managing different parties and different coordination reviews relative to the critical path on the construction program. So, does anyone recognize images like this? Now, I'm hoping not, but I expect a few of you are nodding your head right now. And whenever I see an image like this in a coordination review, there's 4 things that are always asked, and that's what we have here. So, what is it? You know, where is it? Is it my problem? And that's not a problem now. We'll deal with that later. You know, these are the 4 key pieces of information that are always missing when we go through coordination reviews with red and green things. And what we decided is the red and green thing meetings are a complete waste of time. They waste everyone's time, and that there must be a better way of dealing with it. So that is where we start off, and we decided that was archaic, and we didn't want to work with that. Now, this is back in 2014, so we moved into a more basic way of grouping clashes into to more managed groups and reporting on spreadsheets. Then we decided, look, this project is too complex for this. We need a more managed approach to coordinating these clashes. And at that point in time, we had a very high level of coordination. So we knew all of the coordination issues at the level of severity, who they belonged to, and we managed it in a very good workflow, I would say. But it promoted a high level of coordination, but it was a very low level of cooperation, because we were actually reporting on different parties with sort of red, amber, green, which is important, but it brought the focus on reporting on people. Where we moved to was when BCF came into the industry, BIM collaboration format, there's various tools that came out to allow a more collaborative workflow to start being proactive about resolving issues rather than a reactive reporting process. So we implemented a tool called BIMtrack. There's various tools on the market that do the same thing. They're basically a skin over the top of BIM collaboration format. And what we found is it took that coordinated approach and pulled into the project a more cooperative approach to resolving some of the coordination issues. It's a collaborative issue reporting tool. So when we found clashes, we reported them on this tool. And because there was no need to have specialist software to view some of these coordination issues, it brought in the project manager, the project director, the planner, some of the more senior members from some of the parties we were dealing with. And we weren't just dealing with some of the technicians, which are great for resolving the issues, but we need to get everyone involved in that coordination process. And it's cross-platform. So I would say the majority of the team were working inside of model authoring tools like Tekla and Revit, and it works in Civil 3D and things like that as well. So they were pushing issues up from their model authoring platform and closing them out. My team are working in some of the analysis tools like Navisworks and Celibri, and I would say the project director and the design managers, they can just go onto the web and have an overview of where the project is and filter by the particular zone or severity of the issues that they're dealing with. So this is a bit of a workflow. So Inside the model authoring tool, we saw the team doing clash avoidance, reporting issues up from the main platform, which was Revit on this project, sharing their information onto the EDMS, or the CDE, and then my team pulled those models down to federate inside of mainly Navisworks and did all the sort of clash detection work. And we never presented any of the basic clash detection. We pushed those issues and communicated them through BIMtrack. And then when we have the coordination meetings, we have 20 or 30 of the key issues for that point in time that we run through with the project team. So we didn't issue clash reports. What I would say is when you issue a PDF to different teams, people comment on that PDF, and then they send you their responses back on that PDF, and you stick them in a folder, and you never really deal with them. We promoted commenting on this platform so that we could have an audit trail of all the responses and the comments and the sketches to resolve each of these issues. We did issue PDF reports of like a point in time, but that was just for auditing purposes to put on within the CDE process. We didn't issue them to the project team. So back to these key attributes, the 4 that we just discussed. Inside of this platform that we utilized, we've got that information. So when we pull an issue up and put it onto the screen, we have the key pieces of information telling us what it is, where it is, who it belongs to, and it will have a severity on it, or a priority here, telling you, is it really a problem now? And what we found is this approach did improve engagement. So we went from a very good coordinated approach to much more of a cooperative approach. And it's maybe a stretch to say we really got into good collaboration, but everyone was working together. And the reason I've got that image there is every single person in that image is either mechanical, electrical, or public health. And anyone that's been into a coordination meeting, trying to get that many MEP guys into a coordination meeting is really an achievement. So I had to take a photograph, and you can see they're all smiling as well. So I won't go into this too much, but I'm sure everyone's seen some of the fancy animations that we're doing on construction sites. But we linked to the construction program to the 3D models to do some 4D sequencing and logistics planning. And the main reason for this was because we're working within the same site constraints as the Crossrail development below. Anytime there was a change in that program, there was a change in the oversight development program. So it was very important for our client to see where we were and where we should be at a point in time. So this was a very useful tool because obviously your site logistics and material storage changes on a project like this, and the cranes are moving around as well. So this was updated on a semi-regular basis to track where we were with the program. Now, as I mentioned at the start, our client was interested in asset data. They didn't want to overburden the design team through the delivery phase. So what we said was the minimal amount of asset data we need to derive during design to meet your requirements is to have an asset tag just for the main capital M&E elements. We need an SFG20 code, which is it's statutory and mandatory maintenance requirements for M&E equipment, and it's just a four-digit code with a hyphen in the middle, and Uniclass, which is a classification code, which is a common language across the construction industry. So we understand what that element actually is, how to classify it. So those were the 3 pieces of asset data we asked for during design. And what that allowed us to do was actually produce a report with all the assets and the required statutory and mandatory maintenance requirements for those assets, and that will detail all of the maintenance requirements on 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months that we could send out to tender for the facilities management package. Now, once we got into construction, we started to ask for much more asset data from the M&E contractor. And with that, we needed quite a lot of detailed processes to validate that data before it gets passed on or reused. So we created an asset data strategy, which is a document we shared with them, showing them what fields to add, how to include them, some quick ways to add some of this information using Dynamo. And then we validated that information using a variety of tools, basic Excel, there was Revit model checkers, I think there was various COBie checkers, and we also used a tool called Power BI to do some analysis to check consistency and completeness of the data. And what that looked like was a report like this, just a red, amber, green report, just showing where we were with some of these issues. And there's some issues there that are red, maintenance current value. Obviously, we're in construction; that's supposed to be red, but it allows us a good overview of where we are. And you're never going to have this fully complete until just before handover. So it's good to take a view of how detailed we are with the validation process. So we are dealing with a lot of data on this project, and we decided to implement some tools to really provide a little bit of insight and analysis on that data. And one of the tools that we decided to implement was Power BI. And the reason we implemented Power BI was to pull different data sources into one environment, to not only analyze that data, but to show relationships between different data sources. So we pulled in the information that was coming from BIMtrack via an API into Power BI, and then we linked information from the project EDMS system, which was Conject at this point. So we pulled in all the RFI drawing information data, and then we did model audits inside of Revit and pulled that data in to present inside of Power BI. And that was published on some web dashboards. And what this was good for was to actually get into some of the data and find out new information. So for instance, we knew how many issues were overdue and who they belonged to, the different individuals, but we wanted to know the average issue overdue number per organization. And we could do that through analyzing the data in Power BI. And we could also very quickly see how many drawings were sitting at status C, how many were status B. And that's quite important when you're looking at the clash detection, the coordination process for different zones. And we could also bring in the RFI information and start to link that with the BIMtrack coordination issues. So just in summary, clash detection looks a great tool. It's brilliant for coordination, but it doesn't mean that your team are going to cooperate together and start to resolve these issues. If you really get into a managed BCF-based BIM collaboration format solution, it really does promote collaboration and proactive coordination approaches, and linking different data sets really can start to provide valuable insight on your projects. And 15 minutes is not long enough for me to present a project as complex as Hanover.
Great.
If anyone is interested, there is a case study on YouTube. If you just type in, is this London's most complex construction project? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was terrific. And now we'll hear from Brent Rees from Ridge & Partners. Over to you, Brent.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so I'm just about to share my screen. Bear with me a second. Is that sharing?
That is, yeah.
Excellent. And my audio's okay, nice and clear?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this Construction Excellence Surrey Club breakfast seminar. So I'm going to talk about digital fire stop compliance reviews, and I'm going to do a very brief introduction to Ridge & Partners, talk specifically about fire stopping challenges, then about our digital approach, and then how that's applicable across the RIBA stages. So very briefly, so Ridge & Partners, we are at our heart a multidisciplinary construction consultancy, and we were founded in 1946 with 11 UK offices, and I lead a digital engineering team within the business. And our primary services are information management and BIM coordination to clients and contractors and consultants. We also provide digital fire compliance reviews, which I'm going to talk about today, and 4D programming. But we also link up to other parts of our business that provide geospatial services, such as laser scanning, and the less digitalized service of asset tagging, but that is kind of intrinsically linked to some of the work that we do now to link physical assets to digital data sets. So, fire stopping challenges. Bear with me, I'm just going to take a quick time check. So, fire stopping challenges. It's a really complex topic, a really difficult thing to design, to specify, to install, construct, and operate well. And I think, you know, reflecting on some of the projects that I've worked on, if we all reflect on some of the projects that we've worked on, it's something that is notionally mentioned within design responsibility matrices, but not handled all that well. So there's some sort of questions dotted below about the fire stopping design and specification process, and thinking about, you know, actually who is responsible for leading and designing fire stops within a team. You know, is it the architect, or is it a combination of the M&E engineer? Because, you know, there are responsibilities for both parties to get that right. Then we think about dampers and builders work openings, which add heightened complexity. In the current climate, which I'll talk a little bit more about, you know, is the PI insurance in place for that consultant adequate to allow them to design and specify such a thing? When we get to construction, is that design solution correct, and is it still being constructed in a manner that is correct and compliant? And when we're going to demonstrate compliance, are we sure that is a compliant solution? So to add a bit more detail to this, Part B of the building regulations specifically asks that proprietary sealing products are shown by test to perform for the required time period. So that means if you have a 30-minute firewall or a compartment floor that needs to perform for 30 minutes or an amount of time, the product that is used to fill the gap around any penetrating surfaces must be shown by test from the manufacturer to perform for that period of time, which sounds reasonably straightforward, but the difficulty is that only a finite number of scenarios have been tested. So, you know, a specific builder's work hole will have been tested with a specific arrangement and spacing of surfaces. So if the surfaces are spaced too closely, or the surfaces are too close to the edge of a builder's work opening, that instance can be deemed non-compliant. And you know, we are aware of instances on projects that are close to handover that have been required to deconstruct these fire stops and recreate the builder's work opening and redistribute services and apply a new product into the opening. So whilst that requirement has been in Part B for some time, clearly in recent history, the Grenfell disaster has brought heightened focus on some of these matters, and whilst cladding has come under increased scrutiny as a result of Grenfell, anything to do with fire safety and fire compliance now has brought this under closer scrutiny. So this launched a kind of an inquiry, which I'll touch more on in a moment. But you know, some of the things that were cited within out of the inquiry and some of the court hearings that we're hearing there about ignorance around regulations and guidance, a lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. But one key thing is that we needed better kind of focus on construction product specification as a result. So one of the things that the Grenfell disaster initiated was the launch of the Hackett report, and really what that is asking for is for a reform from the construction industry to work better. And some of the points there at the bottom of that slide highlight some of the key topic areas that the Hackett report recommends moving forward. I think it's an interesting it's an interesting shift in direction for our construction industry. We're aware that the Building Safety Act is going to change soon, and we're going to be required to work in a different way and have a greater focus on not just designing a safe solution, but making sure that the information we give to a client at the end allows them to continue to own and operate that building in a safe manner. So a key recommendation that came from the Hackett report was the golden thread, and this is where we kind of link part of our kind of fire stopping approach back into the recommendations of the Hackett report. And this really is saying that construction teams must have better processes in place to pass information in a digital format that the client can use through operation. So the client has a lot of responsibility as a duty holder, as the owner and operator of a building, to manage that in a safe manner, but the design and the construction teams working to deliver that building must give a better quality output to the client in order to do that. And I think this is an interesting recommendation from the Hackett report, because the original BIM mandate from the government had a focus on increased efficiency and an aim to achieve cost savings ultimately through, partially through design and construction, but majoritively through operation. This focus is going to be about safety, and I think will probably have a greater impact in terms of digitalizing our industry, hopefully. So our digital approach to fire stopping. So this was really born out of a project that we were working on in 2016. It started, and the problem we faced was that there were lots of precast concrete panels in this solution, and our designers had to be making decisions earlier about sizes of builders' work openings because of the nature of precast elements, and then making decisions about the fire stopping products that would go in them. So we were asked the question by the contractor at the time, did we know how many builders' work openings there were? Did we know how big they were? And did we know what products were going into the opening? And whilst we had traditional methods of monitoring that, we were coordinating the project using BIM coordination processes, but felt that we could probably do develop a slightly more sophisticated method of monitoring that. So using some of the BIM coordination principles we had in place, and using some of the tools that Michael mentioned previously, such as Celebri and BIMtrack, we're able to extend our BIM coordination processes using information management principles to better demonstrate a compliant design. So it's an iterative process where we're analysing fabric, openings and spacings of surfaces, and I'll touch more on how we set that up now. So the first thing that's really quite important as part of this process is agreeing on products to be used, because different manufacturers have different test data. So if you demonstrate a compliant design with Hilti products, but the contractor elects to use Rockwool products, then those tests and those designs may not be compliant because they've demonstrated that their products require different spacings between surfaces. So it's important to agree, certainly through the design process, which products are going to be used, to agree a short list of products to be used, so you can standardize some of the detailing and the solutions to be used. And then to nominate that product through the tender process, so that there's less opportunity for alternative products to be selected. So the next really important part for the design team is agreeing the process for modelling builders' work openings and fire stops. This is not often dealt with very well, in my opinion. The modelling of builders' work openings. So it's important to agree if there are any minimum sizes that builders' works are going to be opening, what model elements are going to be used to model fire stops, and how the opening is agreed, because it's a multi-party process for agreeing a builder's work opening. Because whilst the M&E engineer might dictate where they want them to suit their services passing through openings, the architect may want to influence the kind of aesthetic of that if they're exposed or if they're in areas that need access or maintenance. So embedding data is also a really important part, and that's why I briefly mentioned on information management principles. So it's really important that within a consistent parameter, the architect or the structural engineers insert information about the fire rating of the compartment, floor or wall. So adding the value in there, whether it's a 30, 60, 90 plus minute compartment, allows us to find those compartments and understand where they all are. And we also need to understand the materials of any services passing through them, because the manufacturer's test data will be written to apply to different types of material of services passing through those openings. So like I said, adding the fire rating into all the walls and floors, and even adding a 0 for those that don't have a fire rating, so that we can tell those that have and haven't been assessed. Adding material information into the MEP services, and naming things appropriately, and using the unit class classification such that it helps us find elements within the consultant's models. So as a result then, we have rule sets that are written in Surrey that allow us, whilst we're performing our clash detection, we can also run the rule sets in Surrey that allow us to find the fire rated compartments, find the services that are passing through them, and check that the spaces between those services are aligned with the selected manufacturer's test data for the Firestop products. So instead of testing for duct hitting walls, we're now checking for ducts passing through a fire stop of a certain value, and checking that that material of service has the required clear space around it in order for that to align with the test data. So we're checking for clashes of the clear zones that are required from the manufacturer's test data, rather than actual physical hard clashes. And that's why I mentioned at the start that, it's an iterative process, much like clash detection might be, where we historically would have identified hard clashes and then maybe revisited that in a fortnight with a design team and asked them to update on whether that's resolved or not. And we'd usually see that as a result of taking their latest models. Now we're advising that either services need to be spaced further apart, or a builder's work opening needs to be bigger, and then advising for teams to update accordingly. So the outputs then for that are firstly, a clear view of all the builder's work openings in a project, a view of all the builder's work openings that need a fire stop in them, and a view of those which have compliant services penetrating through that fire stop. And to do that as a pre-contract exercise, to do that before a contractor is appointed, significantly reduces risk. But to use that output, use that scheduled output through construction and installation, gives a really good mechanism for checking through that process that what is being installed is also compliant, and then giving that as an evidence base to the client as a demonstration that they have a compliant building. And so extending that a little further into the digital space, by modeling the fire stops, we're also able to itemize that as an asset in Kobe. And if Kobe is a deliverable for that project, then the client will have a deliverable in a format that they can use readily to understand how many fire stops there are, who the manufacturer is, and any other peripheral information that may be required to continue to maintain those moving forward. So what that looks like across the RIBA stages. So there are three principal pieces to this in my mind. There's the pre-design element, the design element, and then construction, handover, and operation, which is sort of lumped together. So a really important piece at the start to get this process to work is really setting up scopes of service correctly, making sure that clients understand their liabilities, making sure that design responsibility matrices are aligned, and asking for the right parties within the team to carry out the required activities. And that's irrespective of whether a digital process is worked to analyze those fire stops, but just placing the responsibility correctly for designing and specifying those is really important, and thinking about the digital deliverables. If it is a BIM process that's to be utilized, the asset and exchange information requirements are in place. Through design, thinking about the fire stop manufacturing and the products to be used, making sure the spatial arrangements are correct, and where possible, using BIM processes to itemize builders work openings and fire stops, because sometimes just managing that as a separate exercise can lead to risk and not actually identifying all the potential issues in a project. And then finally, through construction handover and operation. So, this process can allow for products to be nominated into the construction phase of the project. It can give a much better mechanism for checking installations. It can allow for a COBie deliverable. It can allow for a model deliverable as well of those instances. So a much better understanding of what products are being used where, which is really important for client organizations if they're deciding to deconstruct parts of their building and as a result removing fire stops that are installed, and then gives the client a better mechanism to operate the building in a safe way through operation. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brent. I can see we've got a couple of questions already, so I'll perhaps start with those. And just to remind you, if you would like to ask a question, just tap on your Q&A button and type that in, and I'll be able to see that and field that between the two speakers. So the first question is from Starheart, and she's interested in how the efficiency of installation was considered in the design phase. For example, mechanical routes before electrical routes, as electrical is generally a more flexible route around other equipment, and how you save time and money in the construction phase. Who would like to answer that one first?
I think that one's probably directed at me. So how is it considered? This is always a tough one, because when you're coming in as a sort of digital or a BIM consultant, we cannot tell the designers how to model, and even though, so my team, we've got architects, engineers, data scientists, and gamers, and a variety of different professions. So sometimes you're looking at something and you can actually see that they could have a better route here. So generally we bring it up in the meetings and we discuss it. Now, where it's rules based, it's much easier. So to give you an idea, on Hanover, we actually had corridors that were so condensed that there's just nothing. I mean, everything is set to rule, and it has to be put in the right order as well. But what we did notice, we had huge big ducts, and we had cable trays, large cable trays that were coming up to the ducts and shooting up maybe 2 meters and then going across and then coming back down. Now that's all well and good because it was coordinated, but the big issue is well, the ducts are going to go in first, and then somebody's going to have to get up on a ladder and start to pull cables through these cable trays inside of a basement corridor, and it's not ideal, but they will eventually be on a step ladder with 1 foot on the wall, and they'll be pulling these cables, and that's a health and safety issue. So these are the kind of things that we're spotting and we're putting in. So they're non-clashes, but they're design coordination issues. What we generally do is filter things down so that you can see the mechanical installation, and we look at that route, and then we'll turn on the electrical, because you're right, there is much more flexibility. And what we're seeing on almost every project is mechanical and electrical aren't even coordinated within themselves. But the biggest issues come in for us is when eventually we get public health and we've got pipes in a gradient. That, to me, is we have some big issues when that lags behind the mechanical and the electrical. So making sure that we have sections through corridors defined, showing the layers of the layers of the different services is sometimes more important than getting a 3D model early, is getting those basic things nailed down first.
Thanks, Michael. And I don't know, Brent, did you want to add anything to this answer?
Yeah, I think there's so much complexity around M&E installations, and I think whilst the point about electrical generally being more flexible than mechanical, I think it's really important that, as Michael hinted at, that you know, trying to pull and make BIM coordination a central part of the design teams forums, you know, so it isn't a separate exercise that's left to the side and we're just fixing problems. It's intrinsic as part of the design process, and it's integral as part of the design team meetings, so that the bigger picture about what we're considering and what we're trying to resolve is considered by more senior members of the team, not just those who are responsible for the models. And so I think that's a really important part of making sure that BIM coordination considers, you know, the efficiency of installations, which might not be the remit of those who are responsible for the modelling, but you know, it's the focus of the more senior members of the consultant team, but also those within the contractor team who are planning and thinking about procurement and thinking about installation.
Thanks, Brent. And then you've got a question directed to you from Rob Klasker. You see, so I see you've said opportunities to validate. Digital planning is well advanced, but often falls down on sites because of the validation of the model just doesn't happen. How do you see this changing? If the golden thread starts to break when one begins to build, the value is difficult to justify. Interesting question.
Yeah, very, very good question. And
easy one.
And I think we see you know, often written into requirements for projects is it can be the requirements to laser scan models through the construction process in an effort to validate the geometric kind of element of models, and it's, you know, often the role of information managers to validate the data element of models. But I think specifically with reference to this fire stopping element, I think the important part to try and make sure that validation is happening, if we just focus on the fire stopping element of it, is to better write the requirements and place the requirements on the contractor and be very explicit about what we want them to do through the construction process in order to validate models and data that are coming out of that. So if we implement our approach to fire stopping through design, we have a very clear view of the builder's work openings that are required in a project and the fire stops that should be installed. So we would make clear reference to that within the employer's requirements and ask the contractor to minimally probably take photos of each of those instances through installation, so that we can demonstrate that the petition subcontractors built the builder's work opening in the right place, the M&E subcontractor has spaced their services correctly, the fire stop subcontractor has installed the right product in accordance with the required installation details, and we ask for that to be returned, you know, as a deliverable at the end, so that that's a full compilation of data to validate that that's been installed in the right way, with dimensions where possible, so we can feed that back to whoever's responsible for the model element. But similarly, rather than laser scanning the whole building, you know, we could focus elements of laser scanning on those instances. So we could say, for the, you know, 150 fire stops in your building, prior to handover and then being closed up in behind ceilings or into risers, can we laser scan those and overlay that point cloud data onto models, and ask the consultant team to update that and really target where that laser scanning and updating is required. If that's a really important element for the client, rather than say, let's just have a laser scan and capture everything. Let's be very specific and capture those elements and update those elements so that they're correct in the model. Hope that answers that question, Rob.
Yeah, thanks. That was really a helpful answer, Brent. And then one for you, Michael. In your experience, Neil Benworth asks, how receptive are contractors and subcontractors to embracing this digital technology?
Well, I think it depends on your view of the industry. So the projects that I generally work on are very large multidisciplinary projects, and all the main contractors that are on these projects are quite advanced in their sort of digital construction knowledge. Their supply chain, it's up and down. So all the steel fabricators are there. Most of them are pretty good. M&E contractors, pretty good. Once you start getting into the specialist packages, like some of the facades, the glazing, let me see what else we have, partitions, block work, you know, it's touch and go. But I think the important thing here is actually detailing those requirements and making sure they're part of their tendering and appointment documentation. Just on one of the projects we're working on now, I was dealing with a facade contractor, and you know, we were using the old sort of 300, 400 terminology for level of detail, because we're dealing with many international subcontractors, and that's what they understand. And we had an argument with them where they said they will not deliver LOD 400. And we said, look, that's a requirement, you have to deliver it. And then they sent me their model, which they have, which is in a tool called CATIA, where they've modeled every single tech screw. Every single screw is modeled, but what they will supply to us is 350. So, and which is well good enough for what we need. It was more detailed than what we would normally receive from someone in the UK, which would be called LOD 400 here. So some of them are more advanced than others. But the important thing is making sure it is in their tender requirements and not losing sight of that. So when you are doing your coordination reviews, is making sure that the 3D model isn't an afterthought after they've coordinated the 2D drawings. It is part of their deliverable.
And Brent, has that been a similar experience for you as well on your projects that you've worked on?
Yeah, I completely aligned with that view. I think it's entirely dependent on which kind of sections of the industry you're speaking to. So consultancies broadly are, you know, getting up to speed with digital technology and are very well versed and literate with it. Tier 1 contractors the same, I would say, and many of the tier 2 and regional contractors are getting that way. But it's when you start going further down the supply chain, perhaps less so. But that shouldn't preclude all of them necessarily from engaging with these processes. You know, there are mechanisms and processes in place that can allow them to feed into it. But as Michael said, it can be wildly varied depending on the size of the company, what they actually do. You know, if they're a groundwork contractor, clearly, you know, they aren't going to have any modelling responsibilities or probably any data responsibilities. But you know, it's very important for an MEP subcontractor, for instance, to have those capabilities. So yeah, again, it's dependent on what they do and where they are in the spectrum.
Thanks, Brent. And then we've got a question from Tony Mingoya. Would you say the BIM execution plan is a joint collaborative effort in terms of agreeing and signing off between contractor and consultant? Michael, do you want to have a go at this? Yeah.
Short answer is yes. I think this is something the UK has done really well, is that we've separated the information requirements from the execution plan. So so the information requirements are, that is the contractual, that is the appointment documentation that says this is what we require, and the execution plan is a direct response to that. So that has to be a collaborative and joint effort between the whole team to how they're going to deliver those information requirements, and then that is signed off by either the client or their representative.
Okay, thank you. And then can I ask a question? If anyone else would like to ask any more questions, do please press your Q&A button. We have got time for a couple more, but I had one as well. I mean, we opened your presentation, Michael, with the poll about who's currently benefiting and the majority of people felt architects were currently benefiting from digital construction, but then overwhelmingly in the future they felt clients should be the major beneficiaries. How do we close that gap? How do we ensure clients really do benefit from adopting this?
Who is that to me?
Oh, to you, Michael. Yeah, do you want to start with that?
Well, I suppose it's going to be up to clients. I mean, I think if some of the new processes and the ISO processes are definitely going to help for that, because what I quite like about this documentation, like the ISO 19650 and some of the BIM framework guidance that's out there, is it really puts the onus on the client to say, write a brief. What is it you want to get out of this? Don't just pass down risk to your supply chain. What are you trying to achieve, and how are we going to do that? So I think if we can start to standardize our approach, it'll be messy, and as we're getting used to it, as we're finding out with delivering Kobe on projects now, it's not easy. But eventually, 5-10 years down the line, when we standardize our processes, it will become much more efficient, and some of the value from the data we're producing can start to be realized.
Thanks. And Brent, have you got a view on how we maximise the benefits to clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So being very prescriptive about requirements during that pre-design piece. So as Michael suggested, the ISO documents make clear that the client has a requirement, has an obligation to set their requirements clearly from the start. And what the ISO documents do really well is recommend that that an information manager is appointed from the outset as well, that helps formulate some of those requirements and make it clear what they need. And I think the days of just saying, "Can I have BIM, please?" are hopefully fading. We need to be far more explicit and far clearer about what that means, because it can mean a number of different things to a number of different people, and we need to make clear to all the parties, from the consultants through to contractors and subcontractors, what that means all the way down through the process until something useful and tangible is handed over to the client, and not just the expectation that delivering a Revit model to a client is going to be useful or to the client, because it may not be, and it may not be in 5 years' time. But the data within that is probably useful, and it might just be that the client needs a project, the amount of risk in the project to be reduced as a result of using BIM processes, or it might be that they need the data. But that kind of process of teasing out what's important to a client organization is important, and documenting that and asking for that clearly.
Yeah, just to maybe bring it back to the presentation I gave at Hanover. In 2014, the client had 3 information requirements, and we detailed that into a more detailed EIR. But now we're at the point where we're at the final stages of finalizing the validation of all the asset data going into the FM system, which is Dome, and the client is out looking to develop a specialized app for a digital twin, because they've got that foundation of structured data that can feed into it. So they might not know what value, but structured data and structured processes are the key to the sort of value add things that we'll be doing in the future.
Thank you. And we've got one final question from Neil again. Are you currently using BIM for valuing and costing works and changes? And if so, how successful is that proving?
Good question.
Who'd like to take that? Brent, do you want to go for that?
Yeah, so we have QSs within our business that use tools like Costex to assess models, but in truth, the whole costing process is not being conducted entirely from models within our business yet, and I'd suggest that's true of the industry at the moment. They'll generally be used as checks for quantities of various elements and cross-checking element. At this moment in time, the 2D documents are typically the contract deliverables, so they're the documents that have gone through a process of quality assurance and checking, and should reflect exactly what's required of the design at a particular point. But the models are there as a cross-check, as a reference, to make sure that some of the quantities that the QS is taking off translate between the 2D and the 3D elements. So I'd say it's being used quite effectively as a check tool, but not as the sole method of costing or valuing works at this moment in time.
Thanks, Brent. And Michael, did you want to add anything to that one?
Well, I have a trained QS on my team, and we have Costex, and we've done bits and pieces, but it's not an area where we see much interest from clients from what we're offering. And what I would say is, although we're not doing much of this in the UK, when we look at some of our colleagues in Scandinavia, this is a key part of what they do, is actually managing the costing process. But I'm not seeing as much of it in the UK. There's much more focus on the 3D coordination, the asset data, the 4D programming. So that's a weak area, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And I think that brings us to the end in terms of the questions. So I'd just like to sum up some of the key themes that I felt Brent and Michael communicated really well there. And I'm doing it slightly selfishly from the client perspective, as I've mainly worked in client organisations. But I think it was very interesting, starting with that poll about who's currently benefiting and who should be benefiting, and how the role of the client and what they require out of assets and data is absolutely vital. And I know, Michael, you particularly pointed out how key the role of the client was in Hanover, where they absolutely needed to understand how the asset was going to be operated and occupied, and that really drove the shape of some of the work that you were involved in there. And that was also very clear in what you had to say, Brent, as well, about how Grenfell had given us a renewed focus on fire compliance. And although it was the cladding that stole all the headlines, for me, sitting in a different client organisation at that point and having a huge asset base to try and understand cladding alone, and not having necessarily all the information we needed to be able to do that effectively, felt very uncomfortable at the time. And you really fed through that the Hackett report hopefully will shift us to having a clearer focus on safety and not driving the cost savings. And actually this might be the key to unlocking this digital revolution we need, but so that clients can we get an asset built, but we need to be able to own and operate that safely through its life cycle, and ensuring we've got that golden thread. And if we get those processes right from the start of a project, it should allow then the client to manage their asset much more effectively through its life cycle. I thought it was also very clear from both of you that you talked about the role and responsibilities throughout the supply chain and how important that was, and ensuring that we're very prescriptive in tender requirements and exactly what was expected from each element of the supply chain. And I thought it was also an interesting reflection around, what's working on some of the really large projects feels very different to where we've got smaller projects, smaller subcontractors. And perhaps we also need to think about across the industry how we bring everyone on the journey with us. So just to say a really big thank you. Although I've heard information about both your projects in the past, I picked up so much more from today's, and I felt the questions we got from the audience as well really helped to make this a very full and interesting event. So thank you to both of you. And what I'd just like to say is just to plug a couple of Constructing Excellence Surrey Club events we've got coming up. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. So just to say, there is a Kent Construction Conference today, actually. So if that's something you're interested in, and maybe you're based in Kent or you've got business in Kent, you might want to log on to kentconstructionlive.co.uk. They've got lots of events on today. And then in terms of future events for this club, we're going to be holding an event in November, which is going to be a roundtable discussion on the topic of value beyond cost. And then in January, we'll be holding an event about regeneration activity in Surrey. And I know we're having to do this in a different way as we can't get face-to-face anymore. So we're trying to ensure we've got lots of these regular webinar type events. And we also share information through a newsletter and also some thought leadership pieces. So thank you to everyone who's joined us. Thank you to the speakers and to White Label who helped host this with me. and have a really good rest of day. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.